Okay, well, it's time to begin. So, welcome everybody to our webinar today focused on building an authentic and sustainable culture of philanthropy. The presentation is really designed to fill a portion of a gap in fundraising, training, and education. And I hope it's helpful to all of you. There's just such a massive amount of ground to cover in a short amount of time. So why don't we get started? Let me start by providing time to meet our presenters. And I get the opportunity to introduce myself first. Hello, everybody. Chris Looney here, founder and CEO of the Five Tool Fundraiser. And the Five Tool Fundraiser, in case you haven't heard, exists to unite, educate, equip, and inspire fundraising professionals to achieve their fullest potential and maximize the positive impact they're able to make. I've written a few books, would love for you to check those out. Come from a family of fundraisers, certainly as Daphne knows, and basically spent my entire career in the fundraising field. Some would say it's the only thing I actually know on this earth, but I'm glad to be here. Super fun for me to lead these conversations with experts, and grateful to have two amazing experts that are going to guide us through this conversation about culture of philanthropy. Let's start with Daphne. Daphne, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, Chris. Hi, John. Hello to those of you watching. I'm Daphne Halpern. I'm a certified fundraising executive as well as a fellow of the Association of Healthcare Philanthropy. And my practice is focused on healthcare systems both in Southern California and New Jersey, as well as higher education institutes like Hunter College in New York City, as well as Pratt Institute. I've also been fortunate to be a consultant in the field, working with such notable organizations as USA for UNHCR and Carnegie Endowment for Peace. So I'm here today to share what I think is critical, and I'm so delighted to be joining John today, Chris. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Daphne. John, please introduce yourself.
Well, hello, everyone from Phoenix, Arizona. John Skolda. I serve as the Senior Vice President for Advancement for the Boys and Girls Clubs of the Valley. I'm also a certified fundraising executive, and I'm this year serving as chair of the Association of Fundraising Professionals Ethics Committee. I stopped counting how many years I've been in the nonprofit sector, around 35. In the same way, I stopped counting my age at 49. Uh, I teach workshops and classes from time to time on fundraising, board development, and strategic planning. I absolutely love the work, and it's a privilege for me to serve as well as to be on this call.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you to both of you. And I'm excited about this conversation because I think it's going to pull out some learnings, some discoveries, some themes around culture of philanthropy. And I think you'll soon learn that culture of philanthropy, as we describe it and share more about it, really does cut across all areas of an organization, involves all of its people. It's not just a development department focus. I think that's the key theme that we need to know. There are important short-term and long-term benefits from building this culture of philanthropy, some that are just incomprehensible to folks in today's sort of environment. It really is future thinking. The strategies that are required are proven, but they've also proven to be not easy to master or maintain or continue. So there's a challenge there. And there will no doubt be obstacles and barriers in the way to achieving success in a culture of philanthropy, and probably many starts and stops. if you're not careful. So with those cautions out there, I'm excited to provide context to some of those themes. And thank goodness we have our experts with us to help us understand what the heck I'm talking about when I say some of these things. But I did want to start first with a definition. And some people who are watching this webinar might say to themselves, well, I've heard people talk about a culture of philanthropy, but I've never really known what it means. More accurately, I probably would assume that people, whether they're in development or not, would say, I've heard about this concept of culture of philanthropy. I've just never really seen it. And it might feel like seeing a unicorn. Like people talk about it. There's some pictures of what it might look like, but never met one, never been in the presence of one. And I think that's very accurate because culture of philanthropy, from my experience, is very elusive, very hard to build. It takes commitment from a lot of different leaders and from the organization top to bottom. But here's the definition, the most generic definition I could come up with, which is this. A culture of philanthropy refers to the collective mindset, values, and behaviors within an organization that emphasize the importance of giving and engage all stakeholders, staff, board members, donors, volunteers, and beneficiaries in the process of supporting the organization's mission through charitable contributions. A true mouthful, but important to break it apart and dissect it all, which we will do with the help of our experts. So kind of question number one, and you can see that I've kept the definition here on the screen for reference at the bottom, but I wanted to ask both Daphne and John, do you agree with this definition of culture of philanthropy? And if not, great. If yes, great. But more importantly, what would you add to make it stronger, make it more fulsome? What do you think is missing? How do you interpret this definition, which obviously not everyone agrees to a standardized definition for culture of philanthropy? So which of you gets to take the first stab at this?
Go
I'll
ahead,
let
Daphne.
you.
I think you got it.
Thank you so much. I think one of the things that's important, I love this definition, Chris, and thank you for sharing it with us as we prepared for this time together. I think one of the things as you mature, you mentioned it's a future strategy, and it is. Of course, with future strategies, you need to start yesterday. But I think for donors and board members and for your internal audiences, your internal stakeholders, one of the other things a culture of philanthropy does is it helps you better understand your mission. It gives legs to the mission in a way that is, to use your word, fulsome. And so I think adding possibly the words of supporting and better understanding the organization's mission would be something that I might suggest.
Very good. And John?
Yeah, I'm with both of you. First of all, I love the definition. I think it captures the essence of what we mean. I don't think I would add anything. Maybe I could share a word or two about how I react to it, how I interact with it, with the term. I think this is one of the things, like in certain aspects of life, where you know it when you see it. And I would say it a little differently here. I'd say you know it when you feel it. And I don't want to be elusive in my thinking here, but there are some organizations you meet and you know that the culture of philanthropy is strong. And then there are some not so much. I think having a culture of philanthropy is a learned behavior. It's reinforced. It's not something that just happens. So we'll talk about it, I think, a little more about how we make that happen. And it might be, I'm not sure about this one. I'd love to, if we get into it, talk about whether there's a question of degree. Like how strong is the culture of philanthropy? And I think you can see variations of that. So more interpretation than conversation about the actual definition. I think what you've got here works for us to have a quality conversation.
Yeah, well, you just spurred a thought in my consultant brain. I just can't get rid of that consultant brain, which is, isn't it interesting that there is no measurement of an organization's culture of philanthropy? AFP's done a great job of sort of measuring the strength of an organization and its fundraising operations, but there is no standard measure of culture of philanthropy. I think probably because most organizations would be embarrassed by the scores that they would receive, right? And it would force an executive to admit that they spend too little time on fundraising. It would force a board to admit that they spend too little time or money on the investment of the organization in the organization for its success, right? So it's one of those things where it would exist if it made people feel good because we love things that tell us we're doing great, but not so much when we know we're not living up to our potential, right? So, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't be fun, valuable, and important. So maybe the three of us will have to create something for the future, right? Earn our
And I wonder if
certification.
there's a flip side then, though, Chris, instead of those who are not living up to the potential, maybe instead illuminating those who do have a strong culture and what some of the elements are, right? So
Mhm.
there's always the flip. But how wonderful. That's a great way to start this conversation, that there are
Yeah, yeah.
gradients. And John, I really appreciate what you said.
Yeah, and by the way, we often say in campaign work, don't wait for all the stars to align or everything to be perfect before going out and raising money, because you'll never start if everything needs to be perfect. Rather, understand that you're building the plane as you fly it, which is a terrible metaphor because no one likes to believe that in aviation circles, right? But in fundraising circles and in nonprofit circles, and probably in for-profit circles too, you just got to keep building. You got to keep pushing the envelope, keep pushing forward to create the culture you want. And it's not overnight. It's not perfect. There will be strengths and weaknesses along the way, and it'll always change. But anyway, we probably,
Chris, yeah,
yeah,
it
please.
just occurred to me as I'm looking at the definition and all the parties that have a stake in the organization and the stakeholders, as you reference them, they may not even need to know that there is a thing called culture of philanthropy. It just is. You follow where I'm going? Do you need to have everyone defining it, or do you need to have them living it? And I think it's far more important that they live it, and
Yeah.
without to even say that's what we have.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm with you. I think you say we don't need to define it, we need to live it. But because we're not living it, we need to help people understand what it is and how we would define it, So it's probably a little bit circular there, but very, very good reaction to the definition. I think that creates an environment for us to proceed and understand the concept a lot better. um, I think what's interesting is that there are a variety of elements that go into a culture of philanthropy. It's not just one person, it's not just one department, it's not just one activity, it's a variety of things. And I was just wondering to you, Daphne, what are the
Mhm.
most important key elements of a philanthropic culture?
Right, and thank you. So, John, I do agree. It's how it's framed, right? So, if it's framed by a definition that doesn't, there's so many definitions that we have in our world that we don't necessarily live. But maybe from me, hearing about some of the key elements I would consider, there are two that really focus on that education and on the buy-in that we spoke about a little bit earlier. The first is a mission-centered mindset. And to just sort of extrapolate on that, but having every individual within the organization, and we mentioned all those definitions, stakeholder, board member, donor, it's staff, etc., have every individual within the organization believe that philanthropy is central to achieving the mission and that they understand their role in the fundraising process. And that's really where, of course, the education comes in. And then the shared responsibility that philanthropy is not just the responsibility of the development or fundraising team. And how many times do we really feel that? And that's a very strong burden to carry if it's only one team or one unit, but rather it's embraced by all departments, from leadership to frontline staff. I can tell you that some of the most successful cultures that I've seen have been where, much like they strive for five. They want whether it's a hospital or some sort of service organization with a philanthropic mission. If the frontline staff understands what fundraising is and how they can be a help, boy, that shared responsibility really comes through. I also think a donor-centric approach, and we talk about donor centricity often about individuals, but I would think that we can really prioritize a culture that prioritizes our relationship with our donors, understanding their motivations and showing appreciation for their contributions. I think we all know the rule of 7 thank yous, but this is really showing appreciation for their contributions in line with the mission and in line with our culture. And it's always, and regardless of the size of their gift, we know that sacrificial giving comes from so many different places. And then finally, if I were to add to mission-centered mindset, shared responsibility, a donor-centric approach, I would add sustainable engagement. Philanthropy needs to be embedded in your organization's DNA, and that's why that timeline of it's not a future thing, it's an always thing. Ensuring that donors and stakeholders are continuously engaged and feel part of the mission beyond a one-time transaction. So we're moving from that reciprocity model to really that relationship model. So Chris, I think those would be the important key elements that I would discuss.
I love it. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And John, same question, same kind of idea. What to you, building off of what Daphne shared, might be some of the key benefits that a nonprofit organization experiences when they have a strong culture of philanthropy?
Well, yeah, I mean, Daphne did a fantastic description of what you look for. What does this really mean? How do we define it? Well, do all that good stuff, and let me tell you what's going to happen. You're going to have some great results. The first, and I'm going to lead with this, is financial stability, and so needed. I mean, that's our priority. I mean, our missions are important. How do we fulfill those missions? So if you're a nonprofit that has a strong culture of philanthropy, you're going to be better equipped to achieve that financial stability. If philanthropy is viewed as integral to your mission, then that organization is going to attract consistent, long-term support from donors rather than crisis fundraising or just sporadic activity. So that's number one. I'd add then just enhancing your donor relations, key benefit of having a strong culture of philanthropy. Your relationships and your culture will build deeper, more meaningful relationships with the donors. Those organizations that view donors as part of the mission, rather than merely a checkbook or a source of funding, they will achieve a lot more. They'll experience greater donor retention and a longer term commitment from the donors. And I would say that their loyalty is earned. It's not taken for granted. So that's part of it. Let's not forget the benefit of greater staff engagement and collaboration. I get to see that in my organization every day. When the entire staff, it doesn't matter what department they're in, they understand that philanthropy is part of their role. And it gives a shared sense of responsibility and collaboration and even purpose to the work that each individual is doing. So across the organization, our staff and staff with a strong culture of philanthropy understand how their work contributes to engaging, retaining donors, and leading to more motivated teams. And I'd say, finally, it's the long-term benefit, the long-term impact. An organization with a strong culture of philanthropy can focus on long-term growth and impact rather than reacting to immediate financial crises, which do happen. You can invest in building relationships and nurturing community engagement and ultimately implementing strategies that support sustainability for your organization.
Perfect. So good. So good. Thank you. So for both of you, if we were to take a deep dive into strategies, the strategies that lead to building an authentic and sustainable culture of philanthropy, what are those that come to mind? I think, um, John, you were going to share a few of those first, maybe?
Yeah, I'll take a couple. Daphne, there's so much you can clean up a mess if I leave one, okay? Uh, I think the first thing I'd say that's it's listed here, leadership, commitment, and vision. Um, a strong culture of philanthropy starts at the top with us as nonprofit leaders, with our CEOs, with our board of directors, really the entire executive team needs to actively champion the importance of philanthropy, both within our organization and externally. Engaging the board. The board plays a critical role in fostering a philanthropic culture. They set expectations around fundraising. They should be participating in donor cultivation, really just ensuring that philanthropy is a a priority at the governance level. That means the CEO and the leadership have to be involved. We have to model philanthropic behavior. We have to participate in fundraising efforts, cultivate relationships with donors, and be able to articulate our missions and what our philanthropic vision is. So that's where I think it starts at the top. Another thing I would say would be we need to make sure we educate and empower the entire staff. And so to build a philanthropic culture, all staff need to understand that philanthropy is not solely the responsibility of the fundraising or development team. Educating the staff about the role they play in supporting fundraising and empowering them to participate in donor relations is critical. You can do that through staff training, just by offering training on the principles of philanthropy and donor stewardship. How can they contribute to fundraising success? That's going to help employees at all levels understand how their work aligns with the philanthropic goals. So you can think of things like cross-departmental collaboration, encouraging that kind of collaboration between departments, having the program staff, communication teams, and fundraising teams be all completely aligned. I want to give you a great example of this, just how it's manifested. At the Boys and Girls Clubs, if I'm going out to visit a club and I'm taking a prospective donor on a tour, all I have to do is let a branch manager know that we're coming, and they can be creative on their own to realize how to value that donor. My favorite example is a club where they had a welcome message to my guest in chalk outside the front door. What
Nice.
a greeting that was. And it's so simple, and it's
Yeah.
right in the wheelhouse. And that to me, I just smiled and thought, culture of philanthropy, here it is.
That is great. Great example.
Daphne, do you have some thoughts you want to throw on top
I
of?
do. I think
Yeah.
you've described certainly the sort of in the framing with the education and empowering the staff and prioritizing donor centricity. I think I'm going to talk a little bit more nuts and bolts. You want to embed it in your organization's culture. So we talk about embedding philanthropy. And what might that look like? Well, it should be woven into the fabric of your organization's culture, from everyday operations to strategic decision making. And this means, of course, integrating philanthropy into all aspects of the nonprofit's work. So how do we do that? There's two specific, I think, techniques or ways of thinking about it. The first would be to incorporate philanthropy into strategic planning. Ensure that philanthropy goals are part of your organization's overall strategy. I know at one institution I worked at, there was actually a grid, and the grid was finance, so talking about the general financial stability, and then it was fundraising, then it was operations, then it was leadership. And so on those four pillars were all the operations of the strategies of the organization. So I think there's so many different ways you can parse that. But again, ensuring that the philanthropic goals are part of the organization's overall strategy. This ensures that the development efforts are aligned with broader organizational priorities. And of course, it allows you to tie it back to your donors, what they've been able to help create. Additionally, mission-driven fundraising, make it clear that every dollar raised helps advance the mission, and communicate this very consistently to your donors and other stakeholders. So make sure your board understands it, your staff, everyone. When philanthropy is framed as a way to fuel the mission, it becomes much more meaningful to everyone involved. Additionally, I think you could invest in stewardship and relationship building. Building a sustainable philanthropic culture requires ongoing relationship building with donors and stakeholders. So this is moving donor centricity really to the forefront and focusing on it. Investing in stewardship efforts ensures that donors feel valued and remain engaged in the organization for the long term. You should personalize your stewardship efforts. And we've spoken about this before, but certainly tailoring communication engagement strategies to meet the preferences of your individual donors. And in speaking of individual donors, don't forget those annual fund donors that you may be capturing as a group, but you want to focus on the strategy of how you can personalize stewardship to that group as well. Whether through handwritten notes, personalized calls, or small gatherings, showing appreciation goes a very long way towards retaining sponsors and also to engage donors beyond giving. So create opportunities for donors to get involved in the organization's work beyond making financial contributions. And this might look at, you can do this so many different ways. It could be volunteer opportunities, advocacy opportunities, advisory opportunities, program visits, that having your name in chalk as you go to visit. I mean, I can't even imagine what that must have meant to engage your donor with that program visit, right? And then finally, let's not forget what is often sort of our unsung hero in development shops and certainly in building a culture of philanthropy. And that's the way we leverage our technology and data. It's really important that we can use our technology and data in nonprofits to embrace our philanthropic cultures. It helps us better understand our donor behavior. It tracks their engagement in a positive way. And it also helps to empower our communication strategies. We look at this in two ways, certainly with our CRM systems, and we're so fortunate in today's world that there are many different choices for CRM systems that help us understand our donors better. But investing in these donor management systems, and then, John, to your point, having our leadership understanding what CRMs can help us do, investing in our donor management systems that allow for this personalized communication, donor tracking, and relationship building, certainly at scale. And then also data-driven decision-making. So with leveraging our technology and data, it's not just our CRM systems, but how we make data-driven decisions. So using our data to inform fundraising strategies, identify the trends, holy smokes, right? When we see trends, we should really be looking, how can we encapsulate and really encourage them? And then, of course, tailoring our outreach efforts. By understanding what motivates our supporters, we can create so much more targeted and meaningful engagement strategies. So Chris, when I think of what building an achievable and sustainable culture, those are the things I would lift up in conjunction with John.
Sure.
Yeah. Perfect. Wonderful. Well, I mean, obviously, this is a big lift. There's a lot involved. Kind of in some ways, everybody needs to assume their own responsibilities and participate. And I would expect that there would be lots of challenges to overcome as the organization attempts to build a culture of philanthropy, especially if it's not ingrained in the DNA of the organization or something brand new. So, I mean, how do you interpret these challenges? What are the challenges that you would expect, and who's going to go first?
Yeah, I'll kick it off, Daphne, if that's okay. I guess we're calling out the elephant in the room here, right? It's not as simple as saying, "Hey, we should have a culture of philanthropy," and the CEO said it's going to happen, and the board said, "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea." It's never that simple, right? And I think the first thing is that we have to confront is resistance to change. And anything you try to do that's different is going to run into some resistance. Some of your staff or members of the board just may not want to shift their mindset or adopt philanthropy as a priority, especially if they view fundraising as something that's confined to a department. It's just not their work. We all know folks who just say, "Yeah, I don't do fundraising," or I don't like fundraising. And I think we've got to confront that in some form or fashion, right? So we need to focus on educating and involving everyone to help organize our philanthropic efforts, to make it something that people want to be part of, not something they almost consider just necessary to do business and wish that it would fall in someone else's lap. Um, and I think, another challenge is just the limited resources that are out there for us to, you have to invest in changing a culture, right? So if you're a nonprofit with limited resources, you may find it hard to invest in stewardship, to do the training and relationship building that's required. But I would say even in those small nonprofits, if you adopt a donor-centric approach and it becomes part of your regular practices, and that would include things like personalized thank you notes or regular updates on impact, you'll see the results. You'll see the results quickly, and it'll change your mindset.
Good.
I think I have one more to add, John, and that would be, you mentioned about leadership and resistance to change. And I also think it's balancing short-term needs with long-term goals. So we know that all leadership, regardless of where they are in the organization and where we are in partnership with them, there's pressures that they're feeling. And so leaders, nonprofit leaders may feel pressure to prioritize immediate financial needs over long-term relationship building. And we see this happen. It can be very sharp. It can feel difficult. But to address this, it's important to strike a balance between short-term fundraising tactics and long-term strategies for cultivating donors and building a philanthropic culture. So I think there is a way to separate it. I think there is a way to balance those short-term needs with the long-term goals, but it does require conversation, and it does require that change, John, that you spoke to so really fluidly.
Great, great. Well, I'm excited now that we get to sort of change the conversation into an open dialogue around advice and thoughts and suggestions and stories and everything else. And it'll be interesting to sort of see what comes up in this discussion. Final thoughts, like we won't be ending the call in 1 minute, but we've laid out some obstacles, we've laid out why it's important, the benefits, some of the key elements, some of the strategies, and it seems so easy if you just listen to us, but we know it's not. I mean, it's one of the more challenging things to create within a nonprofit, and I suppose and I'm just talking off the cuff here, that one of the reasons why it's challenging is because there are pressures that exist beyond just fundraising. And of course, in a hospital setting, you have a lot of revenue that's generated from sources other than philanthropy. Right. In other organizations, there might be earned income. In other organizations, there might be government contracts. And it's kind of hard to convince an organization, oh, well, it sounds like you just want me to drop everything and focus on philanthropy and building a culture of philanthropy. How do you react to that concept or that question? How do you react to the volunteer, the board member or the CEO that says, I can't drop everything just to focus on philanthropy. Look, it's only the 20% portion of our revenue. I can't make it 80% of my focus. How do you respond to that?
That's a great question, Chris. I think I start with that they're looking at the ratio perhaps in an unfair way. Because having a culture of philanthropy is not a matter of how much effort you put into it. It's about adopting a mindset. And you're not putting a lot of effort into the way you think or the way you approach something. And I'll use this as a way of thinking through it. If a volunteer board member, let's say in a health services institution, is passionate about the work that's being done, say at the hospital, then what you want to encourage them to do is to be as passionate about that as most other things that they feel really strongly about. And if that's the case, then it's very little effort to activate your network, to share the success, to share the excitement, to share the passion that you have for that organization and what it does. That's not an 80%, 20%. There's no formula there for that. It's be who you are, be passionate about what this work is, and share it with your universe.
I
Yeah,
think, John,
thank you.
I thought success and education. So you, both of them, we're so fortunate that we're emboldening the mission, right, with our work. And so it sits in a very sweet and beautiful space already. So I think, John, what John said about changing perspective and just helping them understand that they can, just like you can love more than one thing, you can, you can certainly find time for philanthropy. The culture of philanthropy it's a big mouthful and it's a big stretch. And for some organizations, it will take much longer than in other organizations. But starting with success and what success feels like and how good it feels in the philanthropic sector, I think will help people, really help them understand it and embrace it in a way. So I think I would sit with success and education as well.
Good, good. And I'm probably stealing your final advice for those listening today prematurely, because that felt like very good advice to give those that are listening, focus on education, et cetera. It's so good. So forgive me if I'm asking you too early to give away the sort of final guidance that you'd offer, but I have so many questions and so many thoughts ringing in my head. I think that there's a lot of reluctance, that needs to be overcome for an organization to truly begin to build or adopt a culture of philanthropy. And my guess is that it starts from the top, that the CEO is going to have to embrace the concept. And so the education, the work probably starts there in my mind. I mean, it doesn't need to be catalyzed by that person. It's probably the development leader or someone that's pushing for it. But then the CEO has to say, yes, I agree. We should work or endeavor to strengthen our culture of philanthropy, the way that we think about philanthropy and how it impacts our organization. And then once there's that permission, I guess, acceptance that this is important and worthy of pursuing, then it probably needs to filter down throughout the organization. So the education needs to begin with board members. The education needs to begin with senior staff. The strategies need to be developed about how to go beyond education to then making sure that they're all believers, that they're all aware of the things that they can do to support it, and the responsibility they have for promoting it and encouraging it and rewarding it when they see it and all of those kinds of things. And so in many ways, like any other major initiative, there needs to be planning, there needs to be implementation. And I just we've talked a lot, and I'm not quite sure that people understand that this needs to be considered a major initiative of the organization. It's not just something that happens because you know the definition or because you wish it would exist. It will never happen by luck. It will happen because there's intentionality, there's understanding, there's repetition, there's evaluation, right? Am I crazy to think this way?
Dedicated focus, absolutely, which can sometimes be exhaustive, right? Because this is something that's nebulous, even more nebulous than talking about intangibilities with our donors. But this is so critical. Yes.
Right. And what we haven't probably talked enough about is celebrating success. So whenever there's an opportunity to point to it and say, this great thing happened, this gift came in, this campaign was successful because we have demonstrated the culture of philanthropy is alive and well in our organization. It gives folks something to rally behind, an example, a model for what they can do going forward. I mean, success breeds success, so let's take the time to celebrate that when we can.
I love that. There has to be that time of celebration so people can, be clear about the examples of what a culture of philanthropy allows you to accomplish. It's interesting because, I suppose if I were a CEO, I'd be wanting to create these centers of excellence like a hospital would, right? Or just these distinctives. What really are we all about as an organization and as a nonprofit? And you think about, we want to have a culture of excellence in all of the things that we do, right? That's fair, right? We want to have a culture of caring for our people internally, externally, our clients, our volunteers, our donor, culture of caring, right? And we want to have a culture of philanthropy, which is the ability for people to demonstrate their interest and commitment in our work, to help us expand our mission, to help us do more, to help us be more excellent, to help us be more caring, right? And it's fuel, because it's not like other revenue in many ways, which is generated to pay administrative costs, to pay for operations, to pay for just sort of the expected costs of doing business, right? And so often philanthropy gets to play in that margin of the extraordinary, like we thought we could only do this, but then philanthropy allowed us to go so far beyond, right? So I've mixed a lot of different ideas together there in my excitement and enthusiasm, but I think there's a story that you can tell about culture of philanthropy that blends easily into some of the other distinctives that most leaders are trying to foster in their organization. And it should be easier to tell that story, I think.
Chris, please don't ever stop being so enthusiastic about this work. We need you to continue that.
Yeah. Well, I need to make sure I don't develop scripts, because the scripts have a way of communicating information properly, but also sucking the life and excitement out of some of the things you talk about, right? Because sometimes just what pops into your head is way more exciting than what you might be reading or communicating via script. But yeah, I mean, are there other examples that you can show that highlight the success or the evidence of a culture of philanthropy? Quick question, like how would you know you've got a culture of philanthropy when you're thinking about the board? Like what would that mean to you? Board members do this when there is a culture of philanthropy, fill in the blank. Daphne, what would you say?
I would say that when a new board member comes on, the training that's given to them to onboard the new board member is one thing, but the board members who rally around this new board member to share their enthusiasm, to share some of the stories of what they've experienced, and to also demonstrate that their gifts are meaningful as a board, that it helps lift up to grantors or whomever, if they have an understanding of some of the fabric of it, more so than just the operating nuancing that they might be talking about with not-for-profits, But to me, when I've seen board members who understanding that there have been trustee orientation, but when the new board member comes to the meetings, they'll sort of gather around them and share their story of the not-for-profit and why it's so important and how board members work and together. I think that's one way a culture of philanthropy sort of moves it from the textbook to the real life.
That's good. I was thinking, all of those onboarding activities and none of them in touching on philanthropy, right? Touching on, here's your meeting schedule. You're expected to show up
Correct.
to these meetings, but not sort of like, hey, we expect you to give, or we expect you to invite your friends, or we need you to really understand certain elements of our work so you can share that, be our expert in the community on that topic, or whatever it might
be. I think it ties into John's success, the topic of success. If board members can illuminate success to other board members, it's really anyone in their circle. That's really the culture of philanthropy from the board member perspective, that they've absorbed it to such an extent that they can be that beacon is, I would think, a harbinger of the culture of philanthropy.
Yep, good. And what about John, the CEO or the executive team? How do you know there's a culture of philanthropy with that group specifically?
Well, let me, if you don't mind, Chris, I'm going to give another example for the board, and then we can.
Please.
Yeah,
no, go.
I've seen more than one board, and this has impressed me greatly. I've seen more than one board where there's strong leadership, usually in the chair position, who insists that there's accountability at every meeting, usually at the beginning of a board meeting, where a simple question is put out there to the group. What have you done to advance the mission since the last time we met? And literally go as a round robin. And I've heard some incredible examples of things people have done, whether they've talked about the organization. One of my favorite that just jumps to mind is an individual said, well, it was my birthday 2 months ago, and I put that message up there on Facebook that I wanted everyone to donate through Facebook for my birthday. It was, I'm not suggesting that's a great campaign methodology, but it's really great to see that someone's activated their network by doing that. To your question about—
Hold on. Let's pause there just for a second.
Okay, go for it.
It's so important to me, and I'll hopefully express this properly. You have a culture of philanthropy at a board level. Maybe not when someone like a board chair asks that question, because it could go well or it could go horribly wrong, depending on the personality and the individuals around the table, right? But you have a culture of philanthropy at the board level when you ask that question and everyone is excited about answering the question, doesn't feel put upon, doesn't feel offended, understands where it's coming from, has a level of enthusiasm to share the ways that they're engaging with the mission, right? And that's the big difference, right? It's not that you're pushing boundaries that are sort of uncomfortable. It's that the group, everybody, values, understands, and appreciates the question and is excited to share, right? And that's the distance between that initial step where the board chair asks the question and getting everybody to the point where they're comfortable and happy and understand why it's being asked and are ready with a response. That will not happen overnight. That I would not expect to happen in meeting one, but it will happen over time. So, sorry.
No, thank you. And Daphne,
that's great.
You've seen that, yeah.
And I've not seen it that directly. For part of what Chris said, there is that uncomfortable feeling peer to peer when you're being asked you're being held accountable for a question that you may not have an answer to. But I think getting to that point is startlingly beautiful. And your example of the gentleman or person with the Facebook birthday is just sweet, right? So wonderful idea.
I stopped you short, John, though, of answering the second part. I already forgot what the second part was.
We're talking about the executive leadership. And
thank you. Gosh.
No worries. And I've been privileged to work, especially now, with a team that folks who are not in the fundraising lane are very much aware of the value of a culture of philanthropy in the organization, and they ask the right questions and they volunteer the right um, uh, contributions to the whole process. So that could mean anything from my CFO saying, you know, we're doing business with this organization, and maybe we need to talk to their CEO about how they can support our work. That, to me, that is a manifestation of a culture of philanthropy alive and well in the organization. The program staff, the ones who are responsible for my chalk artists, constantly reinforcing the message that the donors are the lifeblood of the organization. That's all happening at the executive level, and it's done so in the same way we described the boardroom. It's with joy and enthusiasm, and
Mm.
it's just a great thing to see.
Yeah, wonderful. Because I was going to ask about staff, at all levels, whether they're involved in program or not, and how you have a culture of philanthropy at the staff kind of level, which can often be so incredibly impactful to fundraising. You don't have to be a physician who you often think of in that capacity of leveraging the relationship into dollars, right? The grateful patient physician relationship, it's powerful, it's real. You focus on it all the time if you're in a hospital setting, right? But if you're in a social services setting or you're in an educational setting, it looks probably a little bit different. Um, and I just wonder, like obviously the senior leaders have a responsibility to train up, educate, and support and help staff understand their role. But how do you make that happen? How do you begin the path of helping staff understand the opportunity they have to encourage philanthropy?
I think there's always people at organizations that understand it sort of either from other places they've been, or they just have they're just more accepting of it, and then so it becomes easier. And if you can use those folks or build relationships with them to be exemplars, that is often a helpful technique or tool. And there's nothing staged about it. It's true. So the example I gave early on about the person who might be in the hospital setting as a security guard or a frontline, food service person, but yet they understand that Mrs. Smith saying they'd like to honor them in some way might give them the idea that they could give them a tribute gift packet or something. So there's so many different ways that you can evidence it from all different types and units of the organization. I think John's example of the fact of the CFO, sometimes that can be one of our harder partnerships, because the CFO is looking at things, and sometimes fundraising can be seen as a drain or as not a full added benefit until it really starts to percolate. So to have the CFO say, I've got someone that I think might be able to at least have a conversation about giving, boy, that seems like a home run right there.
Yeah, yeah.
Daphne, I may be guilty of staging something, so forgive me. You mentioned it's not staged, and I agree with you. Please understand. I had an opportunity with a donor who did support one of our programs, and wanted to personally deliver the check, the contribution. And I made sure that it happened at our program site, and that the donor gave the envelope with the check to our program chief, our director of
Right.
that program.
That's just smart fundraising. That's great.
Well, it worked for everyone. I mean, the donor felt connected to the program, and the program director was sort of like, what do I do with this? And I think that in a quantum leap sort of way took their thinking about the relationship with the donor to a whole new level.
Oh, that's wonderful.
100%. You pointed out, just a prime example of how you can create a culture of philanthropy by the actions through the development department, right? You gave life through that check presentation to so many different people and modeled the kind of behavior that is celebrated, right? That is encouraged and everything. And I was thinking, Daphne, when you were talking about the champions, if you will, on the staff
Sure.
level, it's so common to start in grateful patient fundraising with physician champions. And you work with those that are amenable, who are great practitioners of it. And the thought being, if you pour into them, they'll be greater champions. They'll do even better than they've done before, right? But then they'll also ideally become models for other physicians who will hopefully kind of begin to understand the power, potential, and everything else associated with involvement in philanthropy. And I suppose it's a good model to carry over into any sector, just picking your champions, pouring into them, celebrating them, finding ways to expand that group of champions to eventually make it the entire staff, right? Of champions on behalf of building that culture of philanthropy. So,
And
man,
I would suggest that champions self-identify in many organizations. So John, your program lead who had done something wonderful that the donor wanted to recognize in some way, whether it was programmatically or individually. I mean, that really just they're already a champion. It's just demonstrating what the effect then of a culture of philanthropy, how it can be evidenced. So agreed all the way around. Yes.
love it. Well, this has just been too much of a good thing. And here we are running up against the hour that we've allotted for the webinar. I would just ask, in addition to all of the amazing things that we've discussed and ground we've covered, is there anything else that you would want to share with those that are listening and wanting to build the best possible culture of philanthropy at their institution? What advice would you give them?
I'm
I'd
going to
start
defer to
with,
John. Yeah.
well, I know you're gonna close it strong, so I'll start it out. I think first of all, be authentic. You've got to believe that this is the right thing and you feel passionate about it. And we've talked a little bit about that. And recognize it does require care and feeding in order for it to be sustainable. That's how cultures endure. So stick with it and continue to love it. And cultural philanthropy will provide the benefit you want.
Indeed, there will be setbacks. Culture shifts can be hard, but the setbacks can often show a new path. So I think that's how I would add to John's great words.
Wonderful. And I would just add that it will need to survive through different administrations, both at the executive level and in the leadership of development as well. So there have to be those safeguards to make sure it's continued beyond the life of just one leader, regardless of where that leader might be leading. Which is often a big challenge because I've seen organizations that had very strong cultures of philanthropy one decade and another decade they do not. And it largely had to do with the loss of a champion and the systems to carry it forward from one administration to another, like anything that you see with succession of leaders, right? So, well, I am so extraordinarily grateful to both John and Daphne for sharing their time and expertise with us. You can see why they are so incredible at their jobs in their profession and why they are experts that I wanted to pull in for this particular webinar. So, John and Daphne, thank you for being with us. And for all of those out there, I just wanted to thank you for plugging in to this webinar. If there are any follow-up questions, do reach out via the email that you see here. And I will make sure to respond. And if there are topics that you'd like us to share in the future on a webinar, do let me know that as well. But again, thanks to the panelists. Thanks to all of you for joining, and we'll see you very soon at our next webinar. In the meantime, good luck with all your fundraising endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.